Wormwood is a really well designed character. Unlike many of the other ones, he's not just Wilson with a little twist. He has pretty significant downsides, as well as very interesting upsides. If you play Wormwood the way you play any normal character, you're going to have a hard time. However, if you learn to utilize his unique strengths while working around his weaknesses, you can do some pretty cool stuff. Lots of the cool stuff that Wormwood can do is outside of combat. He can plant seeds directly into the ground, can tend to each individually much faster than regular characters can, especially if he's bloomed, and crops planted by Wormwood remain fresh 50% longer than normal. He can craft living logs at the cost of health, and now after his skill tree, can craft stuff like berry bushes, saplings, and even monkey tails. His skill tree even allows him to summon minions such as light bugs for light, salamanders for fighting, and carrots that will pick up and bring Wormwood food items. There are more non-combat abilities that Wormwood has, but I won't really be getting into the farming stuff that Wormwood can do since this guide is focused on rushing raid bosses. With that said, now let's talk about combat. Anyone with even the most basic knowledge of Wormwood knows that his greatest weakness is his inability to heal from foods. The typical way that people heal in this game is by digging up blue mushrooms or making pierogies out of meat, eggs, and veggies. Since Wormwood can't heal with these items, it kinda pushes Wormwood players even more into the passive farming playstyle. However, there are other ways for Wormwood to heal himself in fights. They just aren't as readily available. While slower than eating and weaker than pierogies, healing salves still give 20 HP per use, and unlike food, they don't spoil. Wormwood also has his own stronger version of healing salves in the form of compost wraps. This will heal him for 8 HP plus 32 HP over 32 seconds for a total of 40. It also causes him to start blooming. It's not as fast as using healing salves, but for most situations, I consider it a direct upgrade. The next method of healing we'll be using is the tent. Sleeping in a tent consumes 1 hunger every second and gives Wormwood 1 sanity and 2 HP per second. It's not something that can be used in a fight, but it's useful outside of combat, especially if you're trying to make a bunch of living logs. The strongest healing method we'll be using is the Bat. It only has 75 uses, but each hit will give Wormwood 6.8 HP. Considering Wormwood is hitting 2 times per second, that's almost 14 HP per second. Although it's powerful, there's a catch, which is that each use also drains your sanity by 3.4, which is a downside that needs to be addressed, since the last thing you want is to be fighting a raid boss and terror beaks at the same time. Finally, the last way we'll be healing is via jelly beans, since, although they are a food item, instead of the player gaining health directly from the food, jelly beans applies a passive regeneration effect to the player, which bypasses Wormwood's downside. So that's how we plan on overcoming Wormwood's greatest weakness. The only other real weakness he has is vulnerability to fire, but that's not really an issue since you can just not get set on fire. Now let's talk about Wormwood's strengths. I'd say his greatest offensive strength used to be his ability to craft living logs, which means, given you had enough HP and nightmare fuel, Wormwood could craft unlimited dark swords. However, after Wormwood's skill tree was released, he has an ability that, in my opinion, outshines using dark swords. The skill that I'm referring to is Bramble Husk Specialist. If Wormwood has Bramble Husk equipped, this skill makes the husk release spikes on every 3rd hit. Since the spike release deals around 23 damage and doesn't drain the durability of the Bramble Husk armor, this skill effectively increases the damage of Wormwood's melee attacks by 7. This means that instead of a fresh Hambat dealing 59.5 damage per hit, it's dealing about 67. So the skill effectively turns a fresh Hambat into an infinite dark sword, as long as Wormwood is wearing a Bramble Husk. This skill also works while Wormwood is riding a Beefalo, which means an untamed Beefalo is almost an infinite battle spear, and the fully tamed ornery Beefalo is hitting about as hard as a fresh Hambat. Of course, the Husk Specialist skill also adds to the damage of dark swords, so we'll be utilizing both in this run. The second combat ability that Wormwood will be using a lot is his Bloom. Wormwood has the ability to increase his speed at the cost of increased hunger when he's bloomed. This blooming ability goes well with the Husk Specialist, since you can't boost your speed with a Magi in order for Husk Specialist to work. Full Bloom gives Wormwood the same speed increase as a Magi, so we're still going to be moving really fast. There are a few ways Wormwood can trigger Bloom, but the way I typically do it while boss rushing is via Compost Wrap or Spoiled Fish. You don't have to worry about Bloom during spring since Wormwood will be bloomed no matter what. However, in autumn and winter, you want him to be in bloom as fast and as long as possible, so I would invest in all of those skills. The next skills I would invest in would be the mushroom ones. We're trying to take advantage of Wormwood's unique abilities to fight bosses, and there's one boss in particular that is vulnerable to Wormwood's Moonshroom Cloud. Also, get Poor Sap, because compost wraps and mushroom planters require a lot of poop. Finally, you want to invest at least 1 perk into one of the Lunar Cultivator or Lunar Guardian skills, since doing so will make Wormwood lunar aligned, which makes him deal 10% more damage to shadow aligned creatures. This means extra damage against not only crawling horrors and terror beaks, but also against the Nightmare Werepig, Shadow Pieces, and Fuel Weaver. Although almost useless, I would invest my final skill point into photosynthesis, because literally all the other options don't help in rushing bosses. Anyways, this is what I'd consider the ideal Wormwood boss rushing skill tree to be. It's not the ideal Wormwood skill tree, because there's an entirely different dimension to Wormwood outside of fighting, but if we're talking about just killing bosses, this is what I'd use. So with that out of the way, let's finally get into the run. If you've watched any of my other S tier character guides, you'll know that my runs usually start off the same way. Wormwood is no different. In order to fight the shadow pieces, you're going to have to explore the map and move the suspicious marble to the set piece. Since you're not playing as Walter, Wolfgang, or Wanda, you're going to be moving at a snail's pace if you try to move the pieces without a beefalo. Unsurprisingly, we're going to be rush taming a beef. So after spawning in, pick a bunch of grass and twigs, then go to the mosaic biome and get your minerals. Since we're playing as Wormwood, we're not just going after flint and gold, we also want a bunch of niter, because niter is one of the ingredients for compost wrap. So in addition to the 11 gold you'll need for a beefalo bell, alchemy engine, and the saddle, you should get a bunch of niter as well. After getting that, your next mission is to find the beefalo. Since I saw the picking biome was next to mosaic, I decided to go there first in order to hammer a few houses for pigskin, since pigskin is an ingredient for the beefalo saddle. I think this was probably a bad idea. In hindsight, I should have searched for the beefalo first and then went back for the pigskin, since I don't typically saddle them until after a day of taming. But anyways, after I found the pig village, I hammered some houses and made a science machine to craft a backpack, beefalo bell, razor, shovel, and pre-craft an alchemy engine. After all of that, I hammered the science machine and started searching for beef. I also picked up the pan flute and dug up a bunch of red caps along the way. I didn't mention this earlier, but since Wormwood isn't affected by health values of food, he takes no damage from things like red caps and monster meat. So both are a completely viable source of food for Wormwood. However, I want to save some of my red caps, because they are also required to make the syrup of Ipekaka. So yeah, as Wormwood, feel free to pick, dig up, and eat red caps, as they deal no damage to you and feel the same hunger as a carrot. Once I found the beefalo, I bound it to the beefalo bell, fed it a bunch of twigs and carrots, and when it was nighttime, I used the razor to shave the other members of the herd. After obtaining at least 4 beefalo wool, I dropped the razor because you won't need it anymore, and started exploring the map. I also spent a little time collecting poop from the beefalo herd, because poop is required for a few of Wormwood's crafts. Anyways, I like to tame my beefalo with food for the first day of domestication, since at this point, they buck you off really quickly. So I explore the map while keeping my beefalo fed with twigs, grass, and green caps. After exploring a bit, I decided to base near Bee Queen, since stingers are an ingredient for bramble husks, and I can get a lot of them from beehives. Towards the beginning of day 3, I crafted a football helmet for protection and saddled my beefalo, which means it's now time to explore the map. I already found the pan flute, so I drop it at base. I also found the shadow set pieces back at the mosaic biome. This means that aside from just general mapping, I'm really just trying to find the 3 suspicious marble and the terrarium. The terrarium was really close to base. However, it was also protected by 4 guardian pigs, so I decided to leave it there for now. After exploring most of the day, I headed down to the caves and got light bulbs for a lantern. I found the rook nose really close to the base. Now I just had to find the knight and the bishop head. So I explored the map while killing spiders and some spider dens for silk, and fed myself with berries, carrots, monster meat, and red caps. You're going to want to get at least 20 silk, since we'll be using it to craft a bunch of stuff later. In the middle of exploring, I also go down another sinkhole for additional light bulbs, because I'll need a bunch of rot for compost wrap and mushroom planters. I also made sure to pick up seeds whenever I see them on the ground, since Wormwood gains 10 sanity from almost anything he plants, so planting seeds are a great way to increase sanity and provide a little snack later. After exploring basically the entire map, I finally found the Knight Head by Pig King and the Bishop Head in the Dragonfly Desert, and therefore had all the pieces assembled by the end of day 8. On days 9 and 10, I did a bunch of base building and preparations before going to the ruins. I used the silk I got earlier for 4 items. I used 6 to make a top hat for a Presti, because I eventually will need to prototype the Dark Sword, Bat, and Nightmare Amulet. 6 more silk was used to pre-craft the tent. Another 6 was used to make a piggyback, which is basically a direct upgrade to the backpack since beefalo are not affected by the speed penalty. And I made a bug net out of the last 2 silk, which I used to catch fireflies for a miner's hat. Since I'll be almost always using bramble husks in boss fights, the miner's hat will come in handy when fighting one boss in particular. Before heading to the ruins, I also made a bunch of syrup and put it in a chest, farmed the beehives for stingers in order to make bramble husks, and pre-crafted a mushroom planter. After making sure I had both golden axe and pickaxe, I finally headed down into the caves. I have basically 2 objectives that I need to complete before going to the surface again. The primary one is to rush the ruins, and the secondary one is to locate Toadstool. Since the sinkhole that I went down leads to the green mush tree forest, I decided to check the biome for a Toadstool spawner. It did have one, however Toadstool wasn't there. Luckily I found the spawner with Toadstool in the muddy biome shortly after. Before leaving Toadstool, I set up a mushroom planter, which is one of the 3 that I will be eventually using for the boss fight. Now that locating Toadstool was out of the way, it was off to the ruins. Earlier, I had used the bramble husk to clear the tentapillar that happened to lead to the atrium, so I knew exactly where the ruins was. Ruins rushing with Wormwood isn't all that different from any other character, especially if you're on a beefalo. There's some cool stuff that you can do, such as farm Spelunkies with bramble splash damage, but I didn't want to waste my healing on that. So instead, I got Nightmare Fuel from shadow creatures. As mentioned before, the bramble husk skill works even if you're on a beefalo, so it just made fighting enemies in the ruins way easier. Other than using the bramble husk to increase my attack and planting some pine cones to restore sanity, it's a fairly typical ruins rush. After locating the labyrinth and looting some of the chests, it was time to fight the Ancient Guardian. I went over the specifics of the Ancient Guardian fight in my S Tier West video. Since I'm trying to tame the beefalo, and it really helps to have super speed and a light source while fighting him, I fought AG on the beef. There are a lot of bosses that can be fought on a beefalo. However, since this is an S Tier Wormwood guide, the Ancient Guardian will be the only one that I'll be using beefalo for. This fight plays out pretty much the same way as it would with any other character on a beef. The only difference is that Wormwood's beefalo is doing more damage than a normal one, since Wormwood is emitting bramble husks on every third hit. After the Ancient Guardian goes down, I do a quick pass around the chest to get rid of any residual shadow tentacles, and then I take all the loot. Unfortunately, I don't get a Lazy Explorer, but I did get a Starcaller Staff and a Magi. After leaving the labyrinth and mining a bunch of statues, I repair a broken station and craft a bunch of Thulecite crowns, turn the golden axe and pick into a pickaxe, and use Wormwood's living log ability to get enough logs to make a Thulecite club. With the club, 4 crowns, the pickaxe, the Magi, and the Starcaller Staff, I was done in the ruins and began my journey out of the caves. Before leaving though, I got a ton of light bulbs that I would use for rot, and took a quick trip to the Lunar Grotto and obtained a Moonshroom. I then planted the Moonshroom in the Mushroom Planter by Toadstool. I got back to the surface just before day 17. The next boss I would fight wouldn't be until day 21, so I used the rest of the time to prepare. I farmed more stingers for bramble husks. I started making living logs by using the tent to heal up all the damage. Since items spoil faster when wet, I dropped the extra light bulbs I got from the caves into the water. I also got tons of poop for my beefalo by feeding it the syrup that I had put into the chest earlier. Fun fact, if you feed your beefalo the syrup at night, your beefalo will go to sleep and poop in place instead of running around like it usually does. Even funner fact is that if you feed your beefalo the syrup and ride it, it will still rapidly poop, so you can conveniently get poop while riding your beefalo. With the rot from the light bulbs and all the poop, I made a ton of compost wraps. I then wasted a bunch of time by going to the ponds and trying to get spoiled fish. It's a waste of time because I had 12 compost wraps on me, and it was already day 20. With just 15 days of winter, I had more than enough compost wraps for bloom. It doesn't matter, I still wasted a bunch of time catching fish that I ended up never using. I also prototyped both a bat and a dark sword. On day 21, it was finally time to fight the first raid boss. The shadow pieces have 3 phases, and this boss plays out differently depending on which order you fight the pieces in. I decided to fight it in the typical order, which is knight, bishop, and then rook, because the knight and bishop are just impossible to kite. So before the fight, I dropped my beefalo off far away and mined the statues on the night of day 21. This fight ended up being a huge missed opportunity. Wormwood became fully bloomed right before the fight started. However, I never noticed this. Therefore, I thought that I didn't have enough speed to dodge the pieces and opted to use the Magi instead of the Bramble Husk. So I did the entire fight without taking advantage of the extra DPS that Wormwood gets from Bramble Husk specialists. This fight was the entire reason that I made the Thulecite Club. Since I didn't get the Lazy Explorer from the Ancient Guardian, I made the club so that I could have enough speed to dodge the level 3 Shadow Rook. I think you need over 160% movement speed in order to dodge the Rook's teleport. The club gives you 10%, Full Bloom gives 20, and the Road gives 30. So I could have worn a Bramble Husk and still had 172% movement speed, which is way more than is required for this fight. However, I opted to use the Magi, which doesn't offer any DPS increase, but bumped my speed to over 200%. 200% movement speed makes kiting these guys extremely easy, so I guess it's still taking advantage of Wormwood's unique abilities. But still, if I were to do this fight over again, I would definitely use the Bramble Husks instead. The next boss on the list was Dragonfly, but before that I went to the Triple Mac biome to try and get a Tusk. I'll need the Tusk to get a Walking Cane, which I will eventually turn into a Lazy Explorer for Fuel Weaver. Unfortunately, the Triple Mac biome was on the opposite side of the map from Dragonfly, and there were 0 good wormholes in this world. I also wasted time by making a bunch of steam twigs, which I ended up not even using, since my beefalo became fully tamed on day 23. Anyways, after spending a ton of time traveling from one end of the map to the other, I finally got to the Dragonfly fight on day 24. With Wormwood, prepping for the Dragonfly fight is pretty much the same as any other character. You want to clear the Hound Mound so they don't interfere with the fight. You want to build 12 walls on both sides of the furthest lava pond and make sure to place them corner to corner. Finally, you want to bring the Pan Flute to stop Dragonfly when she enrages. Once the walls are done, and I placed the Starcaller charge on the outside of the arena, I started the fight. Since Dragonfly has 27,500 HP, I decided to use a Handbat for this fight instead, and save my Dark Swords for the tougher bosses. The fight plays out pretty much the same as it does with any other character. You want to attack 6 times and then dodge. If you're animation cancelling like I am, you can get a 7th hit in. A small difference with Wormwood is that the speed boost from Bloom allows you to kite easier than regular characters, and wearing a Bramble Husk not only gives extra DPS for free, but it also extends the life of your head slot item. Since I have the photosynthesis skill, the natural sunlight and light from the Dwarf Star is also giving me a bit of free HP. There's not only a lot of downtime in this fight, but if you're kiting Dragonfly well, you're not going to be taking a ton of consecutive hits from her, so my 8 compost wraps are more than sufficient when it comes to healing. Once Dragonfly goes to spawn Lave, instead of doing what people usually do, which is wait for her outside of the wall, I take advantage of Wormwood's super speed and equip both the Magi and Walking Cane in order to chase her down and deal extra damage to her. I'm only partially bloomed in this fight, but even so, I'm still moving at least as fast as a Beefalo, so I end up getting a lot of free hits in on her, since the Lave have no chance of getting me. She spawns 5 Lave the first round, and increases the number by 2 every round after, so make sure to get back to the Dwarf Star when she has at least 2 more Lave to spawn. The Lave's pathing doesn't recognize lava ponds as obstacles, so the walls you built around the lava pond, keep them stuck on the inside of the walls, while you're free to engage Dragonfly on the outside. The Lave will die off over time, and once the last one dies in this way, the Dragonfly will either enrage or go back to spawning more Lave. If she enrages, just do what you normally do and use the Pan Flute to put her to sleep. I usually have my Pan Flute in the second equipment slot, so I accidentally forgot to activate it on the first enrage, and take a souped up Dragonfly slap to the face that deals 36 damage through my armor. Other than that little incident, the fight goes pretty smoothly. After whittling away at Dragonfly's massive health pool for almost a day, she drops dead. After the fight, I picked up my Beefalo and collected all the cactus flesh in the desert, because I'm going to need a ton of sanity for the next boss, which is Bee Queen. Bee Queen is one of the hardest raid bosses in the game, and it's all because of her minion spam. She spawns an infinite amount of grumble bees during the fight. These bees attack pretty quickly, so it's easy for you to get stun locked by them. Bee Queen has an attack with a pretty large range, and if you're hit by it, it spawns honey under you, which will slow you down significantly. The typical way to fight her is to get a few Pan Flutes, a Magi, a Walking Cane, and a bunch of armor and healing. In the first phase, you can kill all but one Grumblebee, and tank the damage. In the second phase, you abuse the Pan Flute to get a bunch of hits on her while her bees sleep. In the third and fourth phases, you use your super speed to lead her Grumblebees away from her when she screams, and then deal a bunch of damage before they get back. Wormwood can fight Bee Queen this way, and I think it's probably the cheaper way to do so. However, there is another way for specifically Wormwood to beat her, and since this is a Wormwood guide, we're going to be going out of our way to beat bosses with strategies that are unique to Wormwood. So for this fight, Wormwood would be needing all 4 Thudosite Crowns that we brought back from the ruins, all the cooked cactus that we got from the Dragonfly Desert, 3 Dark Swords, 5 Bramble Husks, and all the compost wraps. The strategy is pretty simple. You just tank the damage with Thudosite Crowns and Bramble Husks, and heal yourself with compost wraps when you have a chance, and the Bat when your health gets really low. So once I have all these things ready, I hammer the hive to start the fight. Bee Queen has 22,500 health. Since we're tanking and spanking, I'm using Dark Swords so that I can deal as much damage as quickly as possible, since the longer the fight drags on, the less armor and healing I'll have. The Bramble Husks counter the Grumblebees, since the splash damage not only kills them in 8 hits, but they'll also get stunned for a moment every time they get splashed, which reduces the damage you're taking, and allows you to get more hits on Bee Queen. Thudosite Crowns provide 90% damage reduction, and have over 800 durability. But more importantly, they have the special effect of generating a force field that absorbs 100% of incoming damage. While the force field is generated, Wormwood is not only immune from damage, but he's also not getting stunned by any of the bee's attacks, yet the Bramble Husks trigger upon every hit this shield absorbs. Even though my armor counters Bee Queen already, Wormwood is still going to be taking a lot of damage. So when Bee Queen isn't near me, I try to use compost wraps to heal myself. Unfortunately, 90% of this fight will be you right up in Bee Queen's face, and compost wrap healing is just too slow to recover all the damage you're taking. That's where the Bat comes in. When my health gets low, I swap to the Bat and watch as the healing this weapon gives me outpaces the damage I'm taking from the boss fight. The Bat deals decent damage, about the same as a Battle Spear, but it's no Dark Sword, so if you don't need the heals, don't use it. Not only is it significantly weaker than the Dark Sword, but it also drains your sanity way faster. Your sanity will also be significantly drained by the Thudosite Crown shield, since every time the shield absorbs an attack, it drains your sanity by 5% of the damage. That's why we need Cooked Cactus. So basically, you want to get right up in Bee Queen's face, and swing away with the Dark Sword. Heal with Compost Wrap and the Bat, and recover sanity by rapidly eating Cooked Cactus. I also leave a bunch of Bramble Husks on the ground in the off chance that I run out. After blowing through 3.5 Bramble Husks, 3 Thudosite Crowns, and basically 3 Dark Swords, Bee Queen dies in about 5 minutes. Note that I am using animation cancelling. If you're fighting her with regular attack speed, you'll probably end up using almost all the Bramble Husks and Thudosite Crowns, and will need to bring a bit more cactus since the fight will take longer. Anyways, I did say that this method is pretty expensive, but one positive is that the fight is just way faster than the way you normally fight her. Once Bee Queen is defeated, all the methods we've been using to heal Wormwood up until this point gets replaced by the best healing item in the game. Jelly beans don't spoil, and each will heal Wormwood for 120 HP over the course of 2 minutes. Bee Queen drops 6 to 7 royal jelly, and each can be used to make 3 jelly beans. So after cooking the royal jelly in crock pots, Wormwood is good on healing for the rest of the run. After getting jelly beans, I spend the next few days trying to find Klaus's loot stash and the no-eyed deer. This world kinda sucks because not only are there no good wormholes, but there are 2 deciduous forests, and both are far away from each other. So after wasting a day of exploring both biomes in the mosaic, I finally found the loot stash and the deer in the Pig King biome. Since it was almost night of day 29, I decided to fight the Twins of Terror. The more comfortable way to fight the twins would be to ride my ornery beefalo, since it will not only give me super speed and 100% damage reduction, but it'll also let me hold a lantern in my hand while I fight. However, this is a Wormwood guide, so I'll be trying to make the best of Wormwood's perks, which means fighting it on foot. For the Twins of Terror, I am using a handbat for my weapon, bramble husks for armor, and I'm using the miner's hat that I made way earlier as my light source. Since Wormwood has extra speed from the bloom, and I have the miner's hat for light, I don't need to use a magi, which means I can benefit from the free damage the bramble husk gives. So before night, I put my beefalo far away and activate the terrarium. As soon as both twins spawn in, I do what you normally do and pan flute them. Then I focus my fire on the green one because it's easier to separate it from the red one, and it's more of a pain to deal with in phase 2. Once it's separated, it's just a regular Twins of Terror fight, except easier than with a typical character, because the miner's hat gives you a much larger light radius than the magi, and the bramble husk boosts the damage of your handbat to dark sword levels. To be honest, I should have fought the twins using dark swords instead of handbats. I did have the nightmare field to make enough. However, I was a little pressed for time, and it was going to take me 2 nights to beat them anyways, so I thought it would be a better idea to save the nightmare fuel for later bosses. Once Spasmatism's HP dropped below 3000, he entered phase 2 and started chain charging. However, with my walking cane and boosted speed of semi-bloom, dodging him was easy. With the extra DPS that my bramble husk gives me, I was able to beat him in 1 night. On day 30, I went around Dragonfly Desert and collected cactus for one of the later boss fights. To be honest, I should have just fought Klaus instead, since the fight would have probably been over before nighttime, so I would have beaten both Retinazer and Klaus in 1 day. I left the beefalo bell by Pig King, so just before nighttime, I dismounted my beefalo and let it run back to the bell so it wouldn't get caught up in the fight. The Retinazer fight wasn't as smooth as the Spaz one. It's not that he's harder to dodge, or that his peepers gave me trouble, it was more about the terrain. Well, first off, I started the fight with the Starcaller Staff in slot 3, which is a slot I usually use for the walking cane, but when it comes to the terrain, boulders take up a lot more space than trees, so at least one time I got blocked by one of them and ate a charge. Since it was day 30, Deerclops showed up, and to be honest, I think he probably did more good than harm, as he landed a bunch of attacks on Retinazer, and I did lead a bunch of peepers into his attacks. With the help of my big buddy, I was able to kill Retinazer at the very end of the night. The next raid boss on the list is Klaus. However, I wanted an Eyebrow to deal with winter and spring rain, so I got the Bee Queen crown and killed Deerclops. Since the crown reverses insanity auras, I was able to get pretty decent amount of sandy from the fight. Before leaving the desert, I picked the rest of the cactus while wearing a bramble husk. The bramble husk makes its wearer immune to the damaging effects of picking cactus, so I didn't have to waste any armor durability or healing. On the night of day 31, I started the Klaus fight. Like the twins, there's not much difference in how you fight Klaus with Wormwood versus a regular character, except that Bramble Husk increase your damage and his fire spell will damage you way more. In phase 1, I just animation cancelled by swapping my Bee Queen crown with a football helmet. When Klaus uses his fire spell, I wait for it to cast and then run in the opposite direction. When he uses the ice spell, I run around him immediately after the casting starts and then just swing away until it stops. The Panflute had 20% durability, so I decided to use it once on the Krampus, although what I should have done is use it on both Krampus and Klaus. Because I didn't sleep Klaus, he heals up a bunch at his loot stash, since I was away fighting the Krampus. The second part of phase 1 is the same as the first. However, in phase 2, he gains this lunge attack. Ideally, I would have liked it for Wormwood to have been fully bloomed for phase 2, because a fully bloomed Wormwood with a walking cane has enough speed to dodge the lunge. However, Wormwood was only partially bloomed, so I wasn't confident about whether he could consistently dodge. Therefore, I gave up the extra DPS of the Bramble Husk and swapped to the Magi instead. With the Magi, the walking cane, and speed boost from the semi-bloom, I was flying around Klaus. So I just repeated what I did in phase 1, except I equipped the walking cane whenever he tried to lunge at me. After a 4-minute fight, Klaus was dead. So yeah, I really should have fought him on day 30. With all the surface bosses dead, except for Crab King and Celestial Champion, it's time to beat bosses from down under. So I headed back to the base and started my final preparations. Using the wax paper that I got from Klaus's loot stash, I bundled a Nightmare Amulet, a Green Gem, a Bramble Husk, and Cactus. I used another bundle wrap on living logs, wax paper, the Shadow Atrium, and some stingers. All the stuff I bundled is stuff for the Fuel Weaver fight. I get a bunch of poop and rot because I'm going to make more mushroom planters, and later I restore my sanity using Wormwood's infinite sanity trick. For those of you who don't know, The technique is pretty simple. Wormwood loses 5 sanity for digging up a grass tuft or sapling, and he gains 10 sanity for planting it. So each time he digs up and plants the same grass tuft, he gains 5 sanity. So as long as you have a grass tuft in your inventory, you can convert one use of the shovel into 5 sanity, which is pretty neat. After making a door for void walking, I enter the caves on day 34. As I suspected, it's raining, so the eyebrow I made was definitely a worthwhile craft. After entering the caves, I go to Toadstool in order to place 2 more mushroom planters. Despite the fact that I planted moonshrooms on day 15, the first mushroom planter only yielded 2. I planted these 2 and then went to kill Nightmare Werepig. Like many of the bosses we fought in this run, fighting this guy using Wormwood is just like fighting him normally, except with Wormwood, you have extra speed to dodge and you deal extra damage. So use the pickaxe to free the Nightmare Werepig by vibrating all 3 pillars, then either go insane or use the Nightmare Amulet to kill all 3 shadlings. I use the Nightmare Amulet because I already have it and my sanity is pretty high, which means I'll be wasting a bunch of time if I were to lower it. Once the shadlings are killed, the fight can start. This guy has 10,000 HP and has 3 phases. The start of the fight is a little tricky because he usually runs away and comes back after he misses a body slam. However, if he's at full HP and you hit him, there's a good chance he'll immediately turn around and try to body slam you. So just be careful to avoid him after getting that first hit on him. Once he's damaged, the fight truly starts. If he misses 3 body slams, then he will enter the huffing phase for a few seconds, at which point you can get a ton of free hits on him. If he hits you with a body slam, his fatigue count will reset by 2, so make it your #1 priority to not get hit. One thing to note is that he doesn't have to hit you in order to reset the fatigue. If he lands a hit on other mobs such as turtles, the tentapillar, or even Hutch, his fatigue will reset. So make sure the arena is clear of anything that can interfere with the fight. Another thing that can interfere is nightmare creatures, because this boss has a huge insanity aura. Luckily for us, we already killed Bee Queen, so we can use the Bee Queen crown to not only counteract this, but use it to gain sanity. To dodge his body slams, instead of running perpendicular to him, run in a 45-degree angle to get somewhat behind him. You'll take a little damage if you make contact with him while dodging, but his fatigue only resets if he actually knocks you down. When he goes into his huffing state, you can get 12 to 13 hits on him if you're not animation cancelling, and over 15 if you are. Since I'm playing Wormwood, I'm once again taking advantage of my bloom state to mimic the speed boost that a Magi would give me. So instead of using a Magi, as long as I keep the fight near the Dwarf Star, I can once again increase the damage of my attacks by wearing a Bramble Husk. Since I chose one of the Lunar Guardian skills, all my attacks get a 10% damage increase against Shadow Line creatures. So instead of my Handbat dealing 59 damage per hit, it's dealing 64. Once the pig's health gets below 5,000, he will go into his smashing phase. Since I've kept the fight around the pillars, I use my super speed to easily bait him into breaking all of them. Each pillar gives Dreadstone, and you need Dreadstone in order to activate the rifts after beating the Fuel Weaver. Once the pillars are destroyed, just bait out his smashes and start attacking once his fists hit the floor. While he's walking, he'll rapidly recover HP, so you want to bait him as soon as you see this, so that he doesn't erase all the progress you've made. However, it should be noted that the HP he recovers does not prolong the duration of his smashing phase. After entering his smashing phase, as long as you've dealt 2000 HP worth of damage, he'll enter into his third phase even if he recovers a bunch of HP. Once in his third phase, he'll behave much like he did in his first, except he won't run as far away in between body slams, and he starts to use ground smashes as well. In this phase, he likes to follow his huffing state immediately with a ground smash, so just be ready to dodge when he stops huffing. Anyways, with all the buffs Wormwood has, this fight is easy, and he goes down in about 3 minutes. The next boss fight we're going to do is Fuel Weaver. Since we beat the Shadow Pieces, I have the Atrium, and I got the Ancient Key from beating AG. Now I just need to get the Fossil Fragments. So I head over to the Splagmate biome to do that. Of course, using the Bramble Husk while on the Beefalo made fighting multiple spiders way easier. After mining a bunch of Stalagmites, I obtained the 8 Fossil Fragments that I needed to summon Fuel Weaver. The last thing I needed to do for the Fuel Weaver fight is to craft a bunch of Thulecite Crowns and get the Lazy Explorer. So I headed over to the Suda Science Station that I previously upgraded, used a couple of orange gems to turn my walking cane into a Lazy Explorer, and made a few Thulecite Crowns. I was now ready to head to the Atrium. Earlier, I got lucky exploring a Tentapillar, so I knew exactly where the Atrium was. With this knowledge, I used 2 walls and the wooden door that I made earlier to push myself into the void. After walking along outside the Atrium, I found the arena and typed in rescue to teleport into it. I made sure not to teleport in while riding my Beefalo, and I'll explain why later. Once in the Atrium, I began setting up for the fight. I socketed the Ancient Key into the gateway to lock the ruins in Nightmare Phase. Using the 8 Fossil Fragments, I built the correct skeleton. Then I went to the Dwarf Star that I made and cooked all the cactus I had stored in my bundle wrap. Since it's now a couple days into spring, I no longer have to worry about keeping Wormwood bloomed, since he'll stay max bloom for the entire season, meaning I'll always have the 20% speed boost. Fuel Weaver is regarded by a lot of people as the most difficult boss in the game. If you are new to the Fuel Weaver fight, Catperson made a great video that explains this fight and how to typically beat it. Even though it's spring, I wanted to show a really viable method for beating Fuel Weaver that doesn't require weather panes. So the method that I'm using is not locked behind day 36. You can do it in your first autumn and winter. The method just uses Bramble Husk splash damage to take out the woven shadows. So we're going to be using Thulecite crowns in our head slot to reduce the damage we take, and bramble husks in our body slot to extend the durability of the crowns and deal splash damage. We'll be taking advantage of Wormwood's living log crafting to make 3 dark swords. Since we have 90% damage reduction, jelly beans will be more than enough healing, and we have 30 cactus for sanity. We'll also be using the lazy explorer to teleport out of the bone snares, and the nightmare amulet to make ourselves insane, so we can destroy the unseen hands. Unfortunately, I was a bit absent-minded at this point in the run, so I forgot to pick up the nightmare amulet. Because of this, the fight doesn't go as smoothly as I wanted it to. When I get to the point where I need the amulet, I'll explain why it's bad that I forgot it, and what the fight would look like if I didn't. So once I think I'm ready, I put the Shadow Atrium into the skeleton to start the fight. Doing this decreases your sanity by 40, so I immediately eat 3 of my cactus to get all the sanity back. Once the fight starts, I attack him with dark swords while dodging his hits. After he does his bone spiral attack, I dodge his first attack, and then after his second, I dodge his bone snare by running about 5 tiles away from him, and then moving even further after he initiates the snare. If you do this in phase 1, he will stop trying to snare you for a while, as long as you keep him in the center. This allows you to kite this guy without having to use up precious sanity and lazy explorer charges for most of phase 1. I'm using animation cancelling for this fight by quickly swapping my dark swords. However, this is not a requirement to beat Fuweaver. It just makes the fight go by quicker, which means less armor, healing, and sanity restoring items need to be used. Eventually he snares me. I lure him into a corner and just tank him until the fight gets to phase 2. Since Wormwood has the Bramblehusk specialist skill and is lunar aligned, each hit from the dark sword is doing about 82 damage, which means you're hitting almost as hard as Wigfrid. The start of phase 2 is where forgetting the Nightmare Amulet really came back to bite me. Usually I would immediately start destroying the hands and keep the Nightmare Amulet equipped. By keeping it on, it baits Fuweaver into standing in place and trying to mind control you instead of walking back to the center of the arena where he can heal up. Using this tactic, you can destroy all the hands and start attacking Fuweaver before he gets a chance to heal. However, since I forgot the Nightmare Amulet, I couldn't do this. Instead, I spent a bunch of time looking through my piggyback before realizing that the amulet was on the ground. All this culminates in Fuweaver healing himself for 1200 HP, and I wasted a bunch of lazy explorer charges and sanity. After I got the amulet, the fight was sort of back on track. I destroyed the unseen hands by swapping the Nightmare Amulet on and off, while trying to dodge his bone snare attacks. After only one hand remained, I lure him into a corner, destroy the last hand, and start attacking. After Fuweaver became invincible again, I got unlucky when my teleport caused Fuweaver to lose track of me and walk right back to the center of the arena and into a horde of woven shadows. He recovered another 1200 HP from this. This also wouldn't have happened if I hadn't forgotten the Nightmare Amulet. If Fuweaver's health is above 10,000, he will never summon woven shadows. Since I was forced to make him vulnerable before he summoned woven shadows, this resulted in many being alive after the vulnerability phase was over. However, after this, the fight was truly back on track. I ran around the arena destroying the hidden hands by toggling the Nightmare Amulet on and off, and lured him into a corner when there was only one hand left. From there, I waited until he started to summon woven shadows, and only then did I destroy the last hidden hand. This is how the fight is supposed to go. Since Fuweaver is positioned outside the center circle, the woven shadows slowly funnel themselves into him. By positioning myself in between Fuweaver and the woven shadows, the Bramblehusk splash damage kills all of them that get near. After Fuweaver becomes invulnerable, Wormwood just cleans up the rest of them, which is easy, since he emits an AoE attack on every third hit. Since I'm constantly being healed by jelly beans, I don't really have to worry about health for this fight. The only thing that got a little questionable was sanity, because I did run out of cactus meat. This again is a result of all the extra sanity I wasted, and all the extra HP Fuweaver healed himself for, due to me forgetting the Nightmare Amulet. Either way, after a fight full of mistakes, Fuweaver was beaten on day 38. If you want to see the smooth version of this fight, I'll leave the link to a video in the description. With Fuweaver out of the way, we give Charlie the Dreadstone because it's always cool to see the Charlie cutscene. Then we grab Fuweaver's loot and go back to the void by simply jumping on the Beefalo. This is why I mentioned earlier that you want to keep your Beefalo in the void. With Fuweaver out of the way, we've got one more boss left, Toadstool. So we head back to the mainland, type in rescue to teleport back to it, and then go to the Toadstool cap. There are many ways to fight Toadstool. The typical way is to farm a ton of Volt Gold horns, so you can get Morning Stars and Weather Panes, and then wait for the caves to be wet, so you can deal tons of damage with a weapon that has infinite durability and won't spoil. Wormwood can fight Toadstool that way. It's also possible for him to fight Toadstool using other methods, like using a Beefalo, torches, fire staffs, or glass axes. However, since this is a Wormwood guide, we're trying to beat these bosses in ways that are unique to just Wormwood, so we're going to be using Moonshrooms. With a Moonshroom Cloud skill, Wormwood emits a cloud of sleeping spores whenever he eats a Moonshroom. The skill also lets Wormwood grow Moonshrooms in mushroom planters, and the skills that lead up to Moonshroom Cloud increase the yield and speed of mushroom planters. So we've made 3 of these planters right next to Toadstool's arena, and planted Moonshrooms in all of them. Against Toadstool, handbats are totally viable. You just have to drop them whenever Toadstool places a spore bomb on your head, or else they get spoiled really quickly. It's a way cheaper method than making traditional weapons that lose durability over time, especially when you're fighting a boss like Toadstool that has 52,500 HP. However, since we're playing Wormwood, we're going to be taking advantage of his unique abilities in order to take Toadstool out with just Dark Swords. Dark Swords might be more expensive for most characters, however with Wormwood's Living Log crafting, Jelly Beans, and the Bone Helm, it's really easy to amass them. One Jelly Bean restores enough HP for Wormwood to craft 6 Dark Swords, and I have lots of Jelly Beans in reserve. As for Nightmare Fuel, since we've beaten Fueweaver, I can now farm tons of the stuff at any time and anywhere, since the Bone Helm makes me insane and rapidly spawns shadow creatures. Since I have an ornery Beefalo, I can fight nightmare creatures without worrying about them damaging the Bone Helm, since the Beefalo absorbs 100% of damage. Of course, since I'm wearing the Bramble Husk, I'm dealing extra damage to all nearby nightmare creatures on every third hit. So I rack up enough nightmare fuel to make 9 Dark Swords by fighting nightmares. After making the swords and a couple of golden axes, I chop Toadstool's cap to start the fight. I will be using Dark Swords as my only method of damage, and unsurprisingly, I'll be using Bramble Husks for both armor and the means of buffing my attack. Since I'm fully bloomed and I made a fresh Dwarf Star, a Magi would be a complete downgrade to the Bramble Husk in my opinion. For my head slot item, I'm using the Bee Queen Crown in order to offset the sanity drain of the Dark Swords. I also have the Eyebella in case it starts to rain, and I have the Bone Helm in case I dip into insanity. I have the pickaxe, but I won't be using it since, although it makes chopping easier, golden axes are sufficient when Wormwood has moonshrooms. If you don't know the basics of Toadstool, I covered in my S Tier Wendy guide. In Phase 1, he will attack you by launching volleys of boom shrooms that explode after a few seconds, and plant spore bombs on your head, which eventually turn into spore clouds that damage you and spoil perishables. After 45 seconds, he will start to spawn a total of 8 spore caps. Spore caps increase Toadstool's movement speed, number of boom shrooms, damage, and defenses so much that a good portion of the Toadstool fight is coming up with creative ways to get rid of them. The thing most people don't know about Toadstool is that if he's too far away from the center of the arena, instead of immediately spawning spore caps after 45 seconds, instead what he will do is slowly walk back to the center without attacking anything for 15 seconds, and only then will he begin to spawn spore caps. Because of this, you want to always be luring Toadstool away from the center, preferably behind a pond, since the pond will prevent Toadstool from walking back. So this is what I do from the start. Once I notice Toadstool is walking slowly back, I know I can just wail on him for free. When he starts spawning spore caps, make sure to stand as close to him as possible, because he has an enormous insanity aura when spawning them. So with the Bee Queen Crown, it's just free sanity. I didn't do this for the first round of spore caps, so I don't end up gaining any sanity. After he spawns 7 spore caps, I eat a moonshroom which causes Wormwood to emit a sleeping spore cloud. The spore cloud isn't that big, which is another reason why it's important to be standing as close as you can to Toadstool when he's summoning spore caps. Because I was too far away, I have to lure him into the cloud in order to put him to sleep. Once he's asleep, start chopping the trees. I'd start with the ones in the center of the arena, and then get the ones on the outside. The cloud only lasts for 20 seconds, which is enough time to chop 3 to 4 spore caps. So after the cloud disappears, get near Toadstool and apply another cloud to sleep him again. Then get to chopping the remaining trees. It's fine if he wakes up before you finish chopping all of them, as long as the last trees are towards the outside of the arena, because with only 1 or 2 trees, he'll be walking slowly and away from the center. After all the trees are gone, start attacking Toadstool again while luring him away from the center or behind the pond. And that's the Moonshroom strategy against Toadstool. Since Toadstool's spore clouds rapidly spoil your Moonshrooms, I'd advise only holding 6 or less in your inventory at a time. When you run out, go back to the mushroom planters, pick the one that has the most mushrooms and replant one. Since Toadstool has so much health and a lot of time is spent chopping trees, this fight is a long one. So while you're busy with Toadstool, your mushroom planters will be replenishing your mushroom supply over time. Watch out for interference. Since positioning Toadstool is so important, a single stray Snurtle can really mess things up if Toadstool decides to aggro onto it. The smartest thing to do is to destroy all Snurtle mounds before even starting the fight. However, if you do see these idiots creeping up into the arena, you can blow them up by hitting each once with a torch. You need to be a little careful in Phase 3. Toadstool will start to do these double stomp attacks that will drop minerals from the ceiling. The stomps aren't too difficult to dodge, but the problem is that after Toadstool is done spawning his 8th spore cap, his first move will be to double stomp. If you're trying to put him to sleep and you're a little late, you could end up eating 2 point-blank double stomps to the face from a fully powered up Toadstool. So in Phase 3, you might want to consider putting him to sleep a little earlier than previous phases. Finally, since I'm using Dark Swords as my weapon, and I didn't start the fight with full sanity, I did end up going insane toward the end. This is not a really big issue because I beat Fueweaver, so I can just wear the Bone Helm. However, it should be noted that if you're wearing the Bramble Husk, the splash damage will hit passive nightmare creatures, which will turn them aggressive. So if you end up having to wear the Bone Helm, please remove the Bramble Husk. Anyways, since I'm using a strong weapon, and for the majority of the fight I was boosting my damage with Bramble Husk splashes, I am able to beat Toadstool without using any weather panes in a little less than 16 minutes. With Toadstool dead, we've beaten all the mainland raid bosses within the earlier part of spring. That's the Shadow Pieces, Dragonfly, Bee Queen, Twins of Terror, Klaus, Fuel Weaver, and Toadstool, defeated using methods that are tailored towards Wormwood and his unique abilities. And that in my opinion is how to be an S Tier Wormwood. Like mentioned at the start of the video, rushing bosses is only part of Wormwood's playstyle. There's an entire different dimension to him that involves doing things outside of battle, such as farming, creating non-renewable resources, and supporting other characters. However, this video is focused just on rushing bosses in a way that takes advantage of Wormwood's unique combat abilities. For those of you who have stuck around to the end of this insanely long video, thanks for watching, take care, and like always, have a great day.